right? So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention is gaining marketplace insights. And I'll start off with your second deliverable, which is actually quite straightforward and short, except I want you to focus on the last part where we want a set of ideas you generated for solutions, and we want you to detail out the chosen solution, and you're going to start today, all right? Other than that, it's what did you learn from bottom-up immersion? It's quite common among all of us. What you'll learn from virtual interviews and other sources, and so on. And your instructors will explain each part to you. So when it comes to gaining marketplace insights, again, relatively simple tasks, simple, straightforward language. Remember the constraints in thinking, concrete thinking, pictographic thinking. It's very hard to give people a hypothetical. Imagine there is a nutritional powder. Imagine you add it to various things. It's very difficult for people to think hypothetically to that degree because of lack of education and lack of literacy and so on. So using realistic, local, relevant stimuli, minimizing reading and writing, those are some of the things that come to mind. Remember feeling. Imagine me going across the world to extreme poverty in Tanzania, and here I am, they know where I'm from, they know the resources I have, they know my education. Here's this professor from the US, here's a student from the US. See the huge difference in status. And I'm not saying you can just bridge it by saying a few things, but you have to be very aware of that. You have to make sure that the person you're interviewing is really, feeling, or at least you try to make sure they are feeling that they are the experts, because they are the experts. There's no doubt about that. They are the experts on survival, right? And really, I think the message here is to listen to their stories and learn from it. And by the way, when people talk to you, even 2 weeks from now, they appreciate you a lot. It means a lot to them that you have taken the effort to talk to them and learn about their lives. I've seen that. I've told you, I've taken hundreds of students across the world. And I've seen that time and time again. And you folks always do a great job. So, and avoid exploiting deficiencies and vulnerabilities. Every one of us has vulnerabilities. We have strengths, right? And so we want to build on the strengths as well, but we want to understand what's going on. So immerse yourself, learn from individuals. So when you conduct interviews, what you see is what you get. People don't have the time usually for pretensions, okay? So similarly, you don't have to be somebody else. Just be yourself. If you don't know, you don't know. Just be yourself. It's a very comfortable place to be. Be yourself and seek out the powerless. And this is on us. The way we have run our enterprise around the world is by having people from the same communities. And usually that means there's always a political structure to bypass or to make sure they are, and acknowledge and thank and all of that. But this is very important. I used to be on the UN's UN Refugee Agency's Livelihood Advisory Board, and I did a module for their employees on how to be bottom-up. Because just imagine, you're the UN, you go into a setting, who's going to be put in front of you, right? It's usually the people who have relative power. And so I think it's very important to be bottom-up and try to get people who are powerless. And I'm not saying we succeed all the time. It's very difficult. But the way we do it is our field team consists of people from the community itself, okay? Respect, empathy, sincere listening, engage in a conversation, allow people to speak. I can give you some fancy words for this qualitative research, but in the end, it's about having a sincere conversation. It is not about, in an unstructured interview, it's not about asking 8 yes-no questions. It's about letting the story come to you. It's a little bit like if you had an American football and you throw it on an uneven surface, it'll bounce off in any direction, but that direction, if you follow it along, you have a lot of opportunities to learn. You're not learning from 2 interviews, oh, 1 out of 2 people do this. No. What you're learning is, wow, here are the dots, and maybe I'll make a big picture for myself with this along with all the other things I'm learning, okay? All right, make respondents feel they know more about the topic they actually do, right? Don't change topics repeatedly, right? It gets confusing, but again, you will have a facilitator who will translate. Sometimes your interview will be on Zoom, sometimes it'll be through a phone call, and all of that will happen, but this is more general types of suggestions. Use realistic stimuli, and then let people tell their story, avoid laundry lists. You can tell, I'm showing a memory for people I met in 1997 and 1999, right? Because you never forget people's stories. You never forget it, all right? And I'll also make a point on this in just a moment where it's also useful for us in our daily lives as well. So use broad questions. Can you tell me about a time that you went shopping and so on? Tell me what healthiness means to you. So start with some broad questions, right? And then go from there. But I'm going to leave you with two big things. One, listen to stories. And the second is avoid specific questions first. That's it. Those are two big things I want you to take away. And what do I mean by the second one? I mean that don't get too narrow too early on. For example, for this interview and this quote that you saw a couple of weeks ago where somebody said, I buy the cheapest, I first asked, where do you shop? What are some things you shop for? You said cereal, bread, etc. So what do you look for when you buy cereal? What do you look for when you buy bread? All right, I look for this. Then you say, do you look for price? Do you look at size? Don't narrow the conversation very early and let people tell their story. Let me tell you an application of this. I do a lot of mock interviews with my students. And one of the things I tell them is at the end of the interview, people are going to ask you, what do you want to know about us? Do you have any questions for us? And what I suggest to students is that's not the place to say, well, do you have what's the dollar amount you give us every year to go to conferences? Get the offer, then find it out. I think it's better to ask a broad question like, what do you think of the work environment? Or, basically, how do you describe your typical day or something? Put the burden on people to tell you a story. People always love to tell the story, and you're going to learn more that way as well, okay? So again, these are some things to keep in mind. We have interview guides, but you don't have to stick to it. You'll have everything in front of you through a Google link during the virtual interviews, but you can see we have guides for, typically, let us say you're in the education group, we will probably have a teacher and a student. If you're in the health group, we'll probably have a patient and a provider. We're also preparing nutrition separate from health, right? This time we're trying to get a bit more nuanced. There's quite a few water projects. So we are trying to accommodate that and so on. So in each case, you will get a user and you'll get a provider in all probability, right? So those are some things to keep in mind. All right, let's get to designing solutions, and then we will get to our first break. And you've been very attentive. I'm very grateful to you, okay? All right, let's talk about designing solutions. The first thing I want to tell you is, for 13 years, I ran a year-long class. You could be a PhD, you could be master's, you could be undergrad, cross-campus. I always had, in 55 projects over 13 years, I always had design, technical, including engineering, and business students, and others. So it was truly cross-campus, and I can tell you very honestly, I'm going back 20 years now, but I can tell you honestly, the drive for me was, I just thought there were clinical courses, but we needed to be integrative. Integrative means what? Across discipline, culture, socioeconomic status, geography, etc. Right? And you see that's a central part of the mission here as well. So created this course, and they would work for a year, and I had international immersion built in. And at the end of it, basically, they had a prototype, and I told them the most detailed business plan they can imagine. So I'm going to just show you some prototypes, but I don't want you to be alarmed. Obviously, your project is a lot shorter. We don't expect you to be doing this, right? But I think you'll enjoy design. I mean, design is so much fun, and I'll give you a couple of examples, right? This was a group that went out to South India with certain ideas in mind after working with me for a semester, and the immersion comes right in between 2 semesters, but they threw everything out once they went there. And they decided that spoken English is a very important need. And as you can tell, it's an aspirational need. English is a way up and a way out. And sometimes when politicians will try to bring in something about the local language and making it the medium in the early grades, the people who revolt the most often are people who are poor. Because they'll basically say, yeah, sure, you'll send your children to private school, you'll do what you want. What about us? So English, they found that it's an aspirational need. Every project in this class is tapping into an aspirational need. Think about it. Better future for our children, livelihood for me, so my family is better. Every project is about an aspirational need, right? And so, they decided that they will use a feature phone. At that time, we didn't have smartphones like this. So a feature phone, every house had a basic television, or I should say many houses, because the politicians had given out televisions because they also owned the television stations, but the people were smart. They watched whatever they wanted, and learned a lot. So every house had this. So the students came up with this idea of connecting the two and saying the child signs up through the cell phone, connects to a TV screen where there's a voiceover by children in the program for animation. And the parents sit and learn with the children. The parents are usually behind. That's part of the issue, right? And the children talk to each other matched on their skill level and so on. And you can tell it's for low literate users. It's got to be culturally sensitive, right? And it leverages the existing infrastructure. This notion that every time you have a need to serve, you create a device, spoken English device, and then you create a microfinancing plan. Where do you expect all those devices to go, and where is the affordability for all that? So I really liked this part. They used what was already in the house, right? So think about that, whatever infrastructure is out there. Let me give you another example. This was a solar panel that goes on top of the vendor carts. And I have to tell you, I have all these prototypes. I hate to lose any of them. I keep all these prototypes of my students. And this is interesting. It goes on top of the vendor cart. But I want to tell you a couple of stories on this. One is, I would often do the concept testing for them, for students. And I remember talking to a vendor who basically said, okay, it looks good, but number one, will it heat to the level that I want, right? Very good point, because as it turned out, it couldn't. It could only get to reheat things. It couldn't get to, fry things and make it from scratch. Second, the person said, if a policeman sees this, he'll ask for a bribe. It's something new, right? And I don't know if somebody can steal it as well. And thirdly, he said, if I stand in the sun, I'll lose all my customers. They'll only come if I'm in the shade. So what about that alignment between the solar energy and where I need to work, the usage situation, right? So these were things that came out. So some things to keep in mind: harsh usage conditions. You literally have to design knowing that it's going to be very harsh, right? Multiple purposes. A shampoo and a conditioner and a pre-shampoo and a post-conditioner, people are probably going to afford one, and it should serve multiple purposes. If you have something that spreads fertilizer, people are going to use that stock, to take their crops to the market, or take goods to the market and so on, right? So it has to serve multiple purposes, and so a number of other things as well. It leapfrogged energy, culturally sensitive design, and add on to existing product. We didn't design the entire vendor cart. We only designed an add-on. Again, affordability is important there as well. Here is a nutritional additive that was quite versatile. Again, aspirational need. I want my children to have a better future, right? And it could be added to a lot of different things, so multiple purposes. So when you think of nutrition projects, you can think about it as what, meaning it could be iodine, it could be this, it could be that, added to what, in what form, and how are you going to use the packaging to educate, right? And so when you think about this multiple purposes, people are deprived on a lot of fronts, remember, right? And so you can't just say this one will give you this one vitamin. You have to see if you can make it more multi-purpose. Maybe it's a meal, it's a lunch meal for a child or something. Add on to existing product. And also local sustainability. What I mean by that is you can have a local entrepreneur. Remember the person who's embedded, one-on-one interactional, relationally rich? That person knows the community and could end up actually saying, okay, I know the family. I'm going to take this powder. If there's an elderly person, I'll add this to it. I'll customize it. If there's a child, I'll customize it. So there's a real value being added by that person. It's not just something artificial, and usually you need that in order for it to sustain, right? So that's a part of the local sustainability here as well. And product-related packaging. Packaging, advertising is education. People are not just deprived on the iodine, folks, or whatever nutrition. They're also deprived on their knowledge about it, their awareness about it. And who's going to provide that, right? So you have to think about product-relevant support. So those are some things that come to mind. We worked on a lot of different things. This I very quickly wanted to mention to you. This was with a social enterprise, and they came to us and said, we want your students to design an inventory bag which for this social enterprise where we test eyesight and we provide spectacles in rural areas and so on. And I usually, for me, I only have one priority when I get projects, student learning. So I said it's too narrow. Let the students figure out what they want to do. And they came back not only with the bag, they came up with a deployable kiosk. And the whole process of basically going in, doing eye testing, giving pre-made spectacles, and so on. So this is another interesting project. We worked with prosthetics, and again, imagining life, with prosthesis and so on. Again, remember, this was a year-long project, so you are really going to do some detailing and some sketching, okay? So, so don't worry about it. But I'm just learning from it, having lived with these projects for so long. And then again, they needed to think about repair, education, and a network. When you have these disabilities, just the idea of, it can be devastating. So just the idea of a network of people that you could connect to and so on, all right? Drinking water, again, I like this group because they took the value chain of drinking water. And this was a great question asked last week by a student saying, well, you're saying be specific, yet it's so complex, And so the idea is, can you just really focus in on something? They looked at the value chain, and one of the things that happens is people keep water in these pots, put their glasses in, and it recontaminates. So this group focused on how to prevent recontamination, and they came up with a dispenser, and I have this prototype as well, and so that's part of this. So they found something specific to do. We worked with fishing communities, and the idea is that they basically go out, they fish. The moment they have the fish, those days were feature phones, they're able to figure out and get a market for it and a customer even before they come ashore, right? So we've done things like this, and a number of other things as well in this arena. So what we have then is the idea of product design, culturally sensitive, and design for harsh usage, low literacy, local sustainability. Is there a way, both either environmentally or socially or both, that you can make it more locally sustainable? It could provide livelihoods. Multiple purposes, right? Cross purposes. People are going to misuse the product. You got a vaccine that they have to self-administer, they will misuse it. It should still work, okay? It should still work. So that's something to keep in mind. And constant demand for customization. It's a one-on-one interactional world. Everybody will be asking for, some form of customization. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind. And one of the things I wanted to mention is this was actually Unilever, and what they did is they wanted to add iodine to salt. So it's a project that goes back 20, 25 years. And one of the things they found was the harsh usage conditions meant that the iodine splits up from the salt, and don't ask me the technical stuff there. And they came up with a high-tech approach to envelope the iodine, higher tech than normally used, and to make sure it is retained in the salt for these harsh usage conditions. So don't think low income means low tech. It could mean even higher tech. Right? That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is, this is one of my favorite examples, frankly. I have a friend who sells solar ovens. He lives in a very western suburb of Chicago, far west suburb of Chicago. And he makes solar ovens, and he was actually the sponsor for the solar, that project. And a lady minister in Uganda told him, don't ever come back to my country again, because your product causes wife abuse. Why? Because the women would cook when the sun was out, and the men would show up at 10 p.m. And his point was, it's the culture, not the technology. It's obviously both. But culture is bottom up, technology is top down. That's one way to think about it, right? So excellent. So, and again, so this is, again, leverage the existing infrastructure. You can't be building cell towers, right? Leapfrog any gaps, like with distributed energy. And when I say develop product-relevant infrastructure, I'm not asking you to build, again, cell towers, but it could be education. It could be bringing the community together. It could be a farmers cooperative, right? Things that will enable your product to be used and for people to be aware of it as well. And add on to critical, products with critical needs. So add on to existing products. For example, salt is being used anyway. So see if you can add on to that. All right? So, a couple of things very quickly. Initially, we want you to generate your own ideas for solutions. Even if you go to ChatGPT, query it in a way that it gives you the reality and life circumstances, but you come up with the ideas. Okay, we use a lot of those techniques, and I'll give you a sense soon. But what does it mean to be bottom up? Let the reality come to you. It could be images, it could be videos, it could be a number of different things, basically where you can query and try to figure out or use some of our exercises, right? We have a different exercise for water and and all of that. So deep dive into a context. So one thing I'm absolute about in this whole bottom-up process is bottom-up before top-down. And the idea there is if you start looking at what others have done, your creativity gets constrained. That's one point. The second point is sometimes students will say, in the first 4 weeks, you want us to come up with a need, but what if I can't find a product for it? And my response is, don't worry. We'll deal with it when we get there. Now you may say, how do I make it into a profitable business? Don't worry. We'll deal with it in deliverable 3. And the idea there is sometimes you're so worried about profitable business or affordability of product that you start constraining yourself too much. Let's play it out. We'll work on it together. Don't worry, we'll make it into a business eventually, okay? Don't let something downstream constrain you too much upstream. I'm not saying it's right, it's just a different way of looking at things. So these are some bottom-up methods. And similarly, we have some top-down approaches as well, looking at technologies, looking at products out there. My suggestion to you is don't do this. Hang on, wait on this. So it's even the way you interact with technology right now. Learn about circumstances, and we'll go from there. Very good. You folks have been awesome. So you get a 10-minute break. But as you come in, please be back on time. And make sure you have a sheet of paper, and make sure each of you have 2 or 3 small Post-it notes collected over there.